is going on? No horsing around, family. Zach Boyd back at it again, talking all things Indianapolis Colts. And to do that, I thought, hey, man, we hadn't had George Bremer on in a while. Kind of a little bit right here before Christmas. Thought it'd be a great time to connect, talk a little bit about Colts, State of the Union, just where they're at, current events. How you been, George?
Doing well. Merry Christmas, by the way.
Hey, absolutely, man. Merry Christmas to you, and a super Merry Christmas to Colts fans. And hopefully you guys can, hopefully next year is going to be a little bit better than this year was at. George, just initial thoughts on, the Minnesota Vikings game. I think all of us kind of knowing how we feel, but just why you watched it and why it unfolded. I'll tell you right now, and I know it sounded crazy at the time, but when they scored that first touchdown, I thought to myself, this is not for sure that they're going to win this football game. And I thought, no, there's no way. Like, there's just no way they're going to come back. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think they built that early lead, and the Vikings had a lot to do with it. The block punt, some of the other mistakes that happened early on. And then I think with the Vikings kind of figured it out, the Colts couldn't stop the bleeding. But I can't recall any time in my history watching football such a big gap between the first half and the second half from a defense. I mean, defensively, they were dominant in the first half. And then you come out in the second half, and it was just big play after big play. You look at the Dallas game in that 33-point fourth quarter, which was almost equally embarrassing. That was turnovers. There were a lot of short fields. And so there were some things the defense could have done better. That's always the case. But a lot of it was short fields and just things that were out of the defense's control. That wasn't the case in Minnesota. There was one turnover, but a lot of it was just big play after big play. I mean, the biggest one was obviously after the failed fourth down and then a 64-yard touchdown run right out of the gate. I just can't remember a defense before having that big of a swing. And I don't know, is it fatigue, both mental and physical? Obviously you're tired from being out there a lot in the second half, but I just wonder what toll has this season taken on this defense where the offense has been so unable to do anything, in so many games. You just wonder, mentally, is the defense got anything left?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It just feels a little bit like, and I don't know what it is, and it probably will probably never necessarily know what it is, but something's broken internally. Like, it just doesn't feel, something is so off, and all of these parts. And the hard part for me, George, is we've seen Quentin Nelson play at an all-pro level. We've seen Jonathan Taylor do Jonathan Taylor things, Michael Pittman Jr., Stephon Gilmore, Buckner. The list goes on and on. We've seen these guys do this, and they've had moments, but they cannot make this come together this year. And I don't know. I mean, this team broken?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know if it's just one of those years where everybody has a down year at the same time, which happens, and things fall apart. I don't know if there's something deeper there, but certainly there's something amiss, and it has been all year. Like you said, this team at no point this year has really seemed to be the sum of its parts, and I don't know why that is. You look at the talent on this roster, there's no way this team should be 4-9-1. But you watch the way they've played, and they've earned it. They're a 4-9-1 team by what they've done on the field. So I don't know. The offensive line's been getting marginally better every week. Certainly since Jeff Saturday's been here, I think the overall play on the offensive line's been better than it was before he got here. But even that hasn't fixed the offense. So that's why it's tough for me to really put a finger on anything. You've got a defense that completely dominates Minnesota for the first half and can't stop them in the second half. You've got an offense that even when they stopped turning the ball over on Saturday, still just couldn't really mount any drives, do anything consistently, stay on the field, put points on the board. It feels like there's just something, like you said, broken. What is it? I don't know if is it team chemistry? Are they missing a leader here and there? It's hard to really put your finger on, but for whatever reason, they've had a bunch of guys who haven't lived up consistently to their talent level, and the roster as a whole it doesn't mesh this year, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff. Oh, it's just fascinating to me that how this team, on paper, and I think a lot of it, we all know about how important the quarterback position is, George. I think that's never been more evident this year. And for all of Matt Ryan, everything he said this offseason, he's a consummate professional. There's no doubt about it. Um, for me, George, it feels a little bit like a guy who's playing and he's realizing in real time that his time's done in the NFL. Like you can just see some of those looks and some of those the body language that, oh my gosh, like I can't make that throw anymore. There was a throw in that game where I believe it fell about 4 or 5 yards short of Michael Pittman Jr. I mean, there was just no reason. He had time and he just couldn't get it out there. You think the realization with Matt Ryan is, hey, moving forward, this is probably going to be my last season in the NFL.
It'll be really interesting to see. I think it changed a lot when the shoulder injury occurred. He just hasn't seemed like the same guy. I thought early in that game at Minnesota, he had a little zip back, but it didn't stay. It really past the first quarter, it didn't stay. So I think a lot of it, without knowing his medical chart, I'd really like to know how much of it's the shoulder right now. I think that's going to be a big determining factor for him. If he feels like it goes beyond that injury, I could definitely see him stepping away, because I think you're right. You can tell he knows he's not right. He's not able to do the things that he's done in the past. And I think this is when there's this kind of weirdness going on in the season, that's where you rely on those great quarterbacks to come on and to be what they need to be that week to win the game. The guys that kind of get in the shootout when they need to, know when to protect the ball and value every possession. And you look at the guys like Patrick Mahomes, they just erase problems, everywhere else. And obviously Matt Ryan's not capable of being that guy anymore. He wasn't brought in to be that guy, quite honestly. They thought they were going to be able to carry him and let him kind of make plays in spots. And that's not obviously been the case at any point. Unless it's just an injury thing, and we won't know that probably until the season's over. I can definitely see him step away. He doesn't feel like a guy to me that's going to hang on just to hang on. I think he came here specifically because he thought he would fit in this offense, and he thought he would have a chance to finish off his career with a really good run. I don't think he's going to come back next year just to cash checks. I don't think that's who he is.
I agree 100%. I mean, we'll just have to see. I think regardless, I don't think he'll be the Indianapolis Colts quarterback next year when it comes down to it. Going to kind of transition into the talk of the town. A lot of speculation, a lot of things, whirlwinds going on. Captain comeback, Jim Harbaugh. Everybody's, kind of connecting the dots a little bit. Seems reasonable that Jim Irsay would have interest in him. Not so sure that the interest is going to be mutual. But I would always point back to this, George. He wouldn't have had a discussion with the Vikings last year if he didn't have some level of interest of coaching at the highest level. That just wouldn't happen. He would have shut them down from the beginning. And really, if you kind of go back and dive into that story, there was some steam going with that position. I think he kind of felt like he had that position locked up until the last second. They went a different direction, obviously. Validity to him coming to the Colts. Do you think that there's a real opportunity for this, or you think this is just a little bit more of a, national media, creating this storyline that just really doesn't exist?
Yeah, I think from what I've heard, I don't think there's any doubt that he has interest in coming back to the NFL. I think he feels like he has unfinished business. Obviously, you get to the Super Bowl and you don't win it. That's going to stick with you. You're going to want to try to finish that out at some point. I think he could make a case right now. I don't think necessarily Michigan fans would agree with him, but I think he could make a case right now that he put them back on the map, and he'd definitely be leaving them in a better spot than he found them. So I think, you could make that case if you're him. You came back and you did what you wanted to do. You put your alma mater back in the national elite, and now it's time to go and take care of your, goals and your personal business. I do think there's some things about the Colts that would interest him. For one thing, I don't know if he'd get any more leeway with an owner than he would here. We know how Jim Irsay feels about his ex-players and the relationships that he has with them. I think he would have a long leash here, maybe longer than he would anywhere else with any of the other 31 teams. And if you look at kind of the way Harbaugh's teams have been built, going back to the Stanford days, I can't say I watched much of his San Diego days. I'm not going to pretend that I saw a bunch of football when he was there. But even back to his Stanford days, his 49ers teams, and certainly now with Michigan, he built around a power running game. Even when he had Andrew Luck, it was a power running game. And then Luck was, being Andrew Luck along with that. So those pieces are here. You've got to fix the offensive line, obviously, but I would think he'd have a plan for that. I think he'd be really excited about getting Jonathan Taylor and hopefully a healthy Jonathan Taylor and maximizing him. I think the defense, if they didn't have to be on the field for 70% of these games, probably would have a better – I think you feel pretty good about them. The talent there, you've got a Pro Bowler at every level. If they're able to keep most of that together, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the roster after the season as well. But I think that he's a guy who would probably look at this job a little bit differently. Of all the big names out there, and there aren't many, I feel like he's the one that would honestly look at this and give it a real consideration. I think he's the one probably least concerned with who the quarterback is. Least concerned with having that superstar there, would feel like there's things that he could do, and also things he could do to bring a young quarterback along. He helped Alex Smith, really rejuvenated Alex Smith's career when he was out in San Francisco. Smith really hadn't done much until Harbaugh got there, and then he was, he and Greg Roman, I think, really revolutionized the league with Colin Kaepernick. They were doing things that we see a lot now. That were never done before, with the extent that they were running the quarterback. So I don't think he'd be all that concerned with that position. A lot of the other coaches obviously will be. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to two things. One, would he be willing to work with Chris Ballard? And if he's not, is Jim Irsay interested enough to move on from Chris Ballard to bring Jim Harbaugh in? And two, just how badly does he want back in the NFL? Does he really want to walk away from a Michigan team that could be playing for a national title the day after this regular season ends? I mean, they're the heavy favorite right now against TCU. Are you really going to be in the national championship game and walk away, days later? I don't know. I wouldn't put a high percentage on that. But I do think there's some unique things that I just mentioned about this franchise that if he really does want back, he might feel like this is an opportunity he can't pass up.
Yeah, 100%. I've said this, and a lot of people have kind of been direct messaging me, texting me, is there any validity to this? And my thoughts are, A, I don't have sources. B, I don't think money will be the issue when it comes down to it. I think that's the least of our concerns. And honestly, if Jim Irsay is able to talk Jim Harbaugh to coming out of college to coach this football team, I have a hard time believing if Jim Harbaugh says, I'll come, but I want my own general manager to work with. I have a hard time believing that Jim Irsay balks at that. That's just me. That's his own. That's probably the big fish that Jim Irsay can get. I think other than that, you're probably going to go the total opposite direction. Probably a first-time hire, one of these up-and-coming coordinators when it comes down to it. If you sign at Jim Harbaugh, you don't just get Jim Harbaugh, but you get, the football acumen. Also you get the staff that he can probably bring to Indianapolis, which is a big, big deal. I like it. I'm for it. I know he does rub people a little bit thin pretty quickly. I've heard from some people saying, that candle burns pretty quick when Jim Harbaugh's around. But if you're winning football games, I think that's really, we're in a results-driven league. And you're right. You brought up a great point, and I want to kind of double back on this. He was kind of the innovator and the cutting edge guy of having that running quarterback. People don't really think about that, but before you had Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts and all of these guys, this guy goes out in the late round and he selects Colin Kaepernick and he kind of develops him in his own system. Big arm, but can use his legs, using that power running game. That makes me think, in my mind, that you brought up a great point. quarterback is not the biggest thing for him. It's his system. He believes in his style, and he believes that system can win at any level, and quite frankly, has won at any level. I don't know. I mean, Jim Harbaugh would be a big fish. There's a lot of other coordinators out there when it comes down to it. But it'll be interesting. But are we on the same page when we can say, hey, Jeff Saturday experiment's probably going to end that game after Houston when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I thought coming out of the bye that he was in a situation where he probably had to go 4-0 because at that point the team would be 500. He could point to a 5-3 record and say that he turned some things around in the bye and they really came on. Maybe if they win the last 3 games, he could make a case. But these last 2 weeks, it's going to be really hard. When you look at giving up 33 unanswered points in Dallas and losing that game the way you did, and then coming out after the bye and having the biggest collapse in NFL history, it's going to be a hard sell. It's going to be a real hard sell to the fans. And I think when you look at the way the league reacted to Jeff Saturday getting the interim tag, there might be a riot if he's hired as the full-time head coach after this. It'll be interesting to see, though. I don't know Irsay's comments about unknown candidates and wanting to broaden that coaching pool. I saw Stephen Holder today on Twitter saying that he'd said the same thing to him a few weeks ago. So that's at least 3 times he said it. Now, he said it at the owners' meetings. He said it in an interview with Stephen Holder, and he said it in an interview with Zach Kiefer. So, that's obviously something that he's not just toying around with. It's something he's really considering. And I think after the Jeff Saturday hire, it'll be interesting to see what he means by that. Where is he looking for these candidates that are kind of outside the box and which of those guys might show up? But even that, I think, is telling you that he's obviously Jeff Saturday is going to be considered, but I think it tells you that he's very open to moving on. It just might not be in the direction anybody expects.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess to kind of tie a bow on this and put this all together, last question, do you expect Chris Ballard to come back next year and be our general manager?
Right now I do, because I'm basically just taking Jim Irsay at his word. I mean, he said pretty definitively at that press conference when they introduced Jeff Saturday that he wasn't interested in making that change, and he repeated that to Zach Kiefer recently. Obviously, that was before the Minnesota game, and we've got to see how these final 3 weeks play out. I think that's one of the biggest things is nothing's definitive in this league, right? Yeah. I mean, what's true today isn't necessarily true a week from now or 3 weeks from now. But I do know that his respect level for Chris Ballard is really high. I think you can see that from what he said all the way back to when he hired Chris Ballard and said he was the best candidate in the 21st century. He's only talked about this guy in terms of Bill Polian, in terms of Hall of Fame credentials. So I do think he'll retain him right now. But if this year's taught me anything, it's that I don't know anything. That with Jim Irsay, expect the unexpected because really I think he's volatile right now. I think that's what we've seen throughout this season. He's in a situation where, like many fans, I think he's really fed up with what's going on. And I think when you're in that kind of mode, it's hard to know how these next 3 weeks are going to affect him.
Yeah, man, it'll be fascinating. And like you said, you nailed it, really. I mean, no one really knows what he's thinking. I mean, we all saw how he kind of doubled down with the Chris Mortensen report about Frank Reich, and we all know how that ended. So to be fair to Jim, I think it's just kind of a week-to-week evaluation. And that's just what's going to happen when it's all said and done. Jim, in his past, and I don't know if he's going to operate – of course, he's not operated like he has not operated in his past, but he normally is a little bit slow to do those types of things. He's not quite the, I'm going to fire you the second the season's over and all of that stuff. So you would think he'd want to think about it, talk about it, have conversations, and then decide the direction as far as that goes. Last question before we hop off here, GB. You expect the Colts to draft a quarterback this year?
I do. It'll be interesting to see how all that turns out because – I'm not as high on this draft class as a lot of people are yet. And, that's another thing that's fluid. I might change my mind as the draft process goes on. But right now, I think there's a lot of question marks with these guys beyond Bryce Young. He's really the only one I've seen do things that I feel like translate to the NFL pretty easily. A lot of the other guys are projects. Sometimes those work out. I guess for me, it's dangerous to look at like Josh Allen and say, I'm going to replicate that. Yeah. The same way it was dangerous to look at Drew Brees or Russell Wilson and say, I'm going to replicate that. So many things have to fall into place. They have to have the right coach. They have to have the right guys around them. They have to have the right system. Not saying it won't work, but I'm not nearly as optimistic about a young guy coming in here and turning things around. I think it's one of those maybe careful what you wish for. People have been wanting a young quarterback here for a while now, and I'm not sure the results are going to be any better than they have been the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, to kind of steal something from Chris Ballard, he said, I can go out here and draft a quarterback, but it better be the right one. I agree with that. But I think also one of the hard parts about being a general manager is sometimes if that right one's not staring right in front of you, you got to go find that right one and just make it happen. You're going to have to give up a lot if you want to do something like that. Lots to come this season. 3 more games, guys. Thanks for sticking in here with us. We just went over 2,100 subscribers on YouTube. Super thankful to each and every one of you that take the time out of your busy day to comment. You guys do such a great job. Let us know what you think. Who's going to be the general manager? Who's going to be our head coach? Give us a few candidates out there. Give us some quarterbacks that you like, that you want us to do some film studies on and want to review. And until next time, guys, go Colts.